Welcome everyone to this webinar co-hosted by COPE and Crossref about funding metadata, funding transparency. Today we will cover COPE best practices and guidelines to ensure appropriate and transparent funding acknowledgement in scholarly communications, as well as some of the tools and standards available in Crossref to bridge the gap between guidelines and practice. As for introductions, my name is Rocío Gaudioso. I am a Community Engagement Manager at Crossref, and I am joined by Nancy Chester, Chair of COPE. And Cora Korsek is here with us as well as the Director of Community of Crossref. Just before we start, just a quick note about our code of conduct. We want all our meetings to be safe, respectful, and productive for everyone. So we ask that you be mindful of our code of conduct. Just very quickly, I just wanted to highlight one of the latest points that we have included in our code of conduct, and that is that we do not allow AI tools to be used during Crossref meetings, and we will be removing any bot that we find from today's meeting. Our recording of this webinar will be shared afterwards for your records. If you have any concerns or complaints about someone's conduct or about our code of conduct during this meeting, please contact any of Crossref colleagues here directly, or you can send a confidential email to conduct@crossref.org. As Cora said, please say hello in the chat. Just let us know where you are joining us from. And please also feel free to use the chat function to share any immediate reflections or ideas that you have during these presentations. But I would like to ask you to please use the Q&A function for questions. This is for us to be able to keep track of the questions more easily, make sure that we don't lose track of any of them, and that we can answer your questions at the end of the presentations. If we are not able to answer all of the questions, we will be sharing the answers afterwards via email. So please just ask anything that you may want to know in the Q&A. And without any further ado, Nancy, I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody. The fact that so many of you are signing on and letting us know from all the different places you are joining us from really reinforces what an important topic this is today. So my task today is to talk with you about recent guidance that, actually it's a discussion document that COPE has published. Discussion documents for background are not considered guidance, but they are opening up a topic for discussion and providing some background. They often lead to guidance documents, but they are meant to start a conversation about best practices. You can find the DOI and link to that. And perhaps, Cora, you could include that in the chat so people could get to that easily. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. Most of my slides are taken directly from that document, and this infographic sets it up for you and really talks about the key points for declaring funding sources for research. These include incorporating all of the different entities and people that are involved in the scholarly publishing record, including funders, granting bodies, authors, journals, funding agencies and journals, and readers, because we're all part of the same ecosystem. Next slide, please. So for the reader, what's the goal of the funding statement? This is really about transparency to assess any possible conflicts of interest that might be related specifically to the funding. Several organizations, most notably the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, makes the point that funding statements are unique and should be reported separately from other types of conflicts of interest or competing interests. Awareness of the sources of support for the published research allows the reader to assess the use of taxpayers or private organizations' donations, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the public that benefits from research and frequently and almost always actually has a role in funding it. New slide, please. For the funding agencies, funding statements do help them track output from the research they have funded. This is on top of other mechanisms that funding agencies have for tracking their research, but it is a useful addition to those other methods. It also allows funding agencies to confirm that the cited funding was related to the research, and conversely, that grants or other funding agencies not related to the publication are not reported as being related to the research. And this has apparently become an increasing problem for funding agencies, that funding sources are sort of packed into some of these funding statements where they don't belong. It also allows funding agencies to document good stewardship of their granting funds, and it allows funding agencies to be able to monitor for fraud by those who list grants that did not provide for the funding for the work reported in the paper, or listing individuals whose contributions were not funded by a specific grant, or in fact omitting a grant that supported the work described. Next slide. For the author, it does offer them the ability to express gratitude for the funding. This is certainly a soft reason, but it's an important one. Many researchers, of course, require funding for their research, and it's nice in this day and age to be able to say thank you publicly for something. More importantly, and less soft perhaps, it is a way for authors to show funders how their funding was used, and it may be important for these authors in future grant applications to have a record that they have transparently identified their funding sources. As well, funding statements allow grantees a mechanism for fulfilling what is often a requirement to report associated funding, and so it helps them close the loop. Next slide, please. There are, I mentioned one of these, but there are two documents that I think are really important that set up the background for our discussion document. One was the Second World Congresses of Research Integrity Statement that stated that all sources of research funding, including direct and indirect support, supply of equipment or materials, or other support, should be disclosed. And not only who the funder was, but what their role was, if any, in research design, execution, analysis, interpretation, and writing. So again, reinforcing the importance of transparency. The ICMJE says that the credibility of papers depend in part on transparency about relationships and how they relate to the planning, implementation, writing, peer review, editing, and publication of scientific report. It's as I mentioned, disclosure of potential conflicts of interest is distinct and extends beyond direct support of the work. And they also reiterate that funding statements should include only direct support, not indirect support. Next slide, please. So the importance of transparent funding statements. Publishers oftentimes have a large portfolio of journals that they own or manage, and their funding statements may be the same across all of their journals, although they should definitely be included in the journal information as well. Journals who lack a publisher or whose publisher doesn't provide a across the portfolio statement should have their own. And again, these should be described in the journal information. The instruction should include information about the requirements for the funding disclosure, but the journal editor is responsible for ensuring that authors submit funding information that fulfills their requirements and also then for publishing it. So they need to collect the appropriate information, and the editor is responsible for publishing it. Statements may appear within the body of the paper, a separate section of the paper, in the front matter, or the acknowledgement section. We don't have any guidance as to one place is better than the other. It just needs to consistently appear in published works. Next slide, please. Funders oftentimes, in fact, in my work on developing this document, I found that funders from across the world that I looked at had really different requirements. They varied quite broadly. They often provide very specific directions for content, and the grantee is required to follow these. It's important for publishers and journals to recognize that the funder's requirements may exceed those of the journal or publisher, and I'm going to comment on what they can do about that. Next slide, please. It is the author's responsibility to inform the editors at the time of a submission of any requirements by the funder, so that the editor has information going forward. If the funder's requirements exceed those of the journal or publisher, the editor has a couple of options. One, they can just say, we're going to comply with the funder's requirements and proceed with the peer review. Or they could notify the authors that the journal will not accept the agency requirements, at which point the authors can negotiate with the funding agency and withdraw the paper if unacceptable to the granting agency, or the journal at this point could reject the paper. Conversely, once notified, the agency could decide to be flexible and notify the author, who then notify the journal editor that they can proceed with the peer review with the expectation that the journal's requirements will be met, but perhaps not all of the funder's requirements. Next slide, please. This is a wordy slide, but I didn't know any way to make it easier to look at than have all the quotes here. The European Research Council, or the ERC, requires that all output funded by ERC grants contain the European Union emblem and the ERC logo, and these need to be displayed together. They also require certain the following paragraph to be included in funding statements. This is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the author or authors only, and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Research Council Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them. Further, the ERC requires that specific information is noted in the paper, including that the work is supported by an ERC grant and that the acronym number or project DOI is included. Next, please. The UK Research and Innovation requires grantees to acknowledge their support in research articles published in journals, conference proceedings, publication platforms such as preprints, monographs, book chapters, edited collections, and deposited in repositories. So really all of the publication types currently common. At a minimum, the funding should be acknowledged in a sentence with the funding agency written full, followed by a grant number in square brackets. And this one particularly, I think, makes the point that many of these granting agencies have very specific requirements for their funding statements. New paragraph, please, or a new slide, please. COPE recommendations are that the following are pretty reasonable requirements for a transparent funding statement by a publisher or journal. That they should list all funding agencies involved in the research, the name of the agency, number of grant or other unique identifier, the role of the funding agency in the work reported, and the individuals reported by each funding agency should be linked to the agency so that a direct link between the grantor, the grantee, and the published work is clear. And this concept of a through line from the grant to the published work is something that is really important. If the research is unfunded, a statement of no funding should be included. Next, please. So these are some examples of the way this might work out. If the funding agency, let's say, is a granting agency, you provide the grant type and specific identifier. Author 1 and author 2 are linked to that, and a statement that the grant supported the salaries of these authors and laboratory analyses. In another instance, this is a training grant and a specific identifier. This would be author 3, and you might say author 3 receives a stipend for research activities, part of which were applied to this study. If it's a university research support grant, it might be, for instance, that all authors are supported by this, and a statement that participant recruiting was supported by the university's research support grant. And then lastly, if there was no funding, a statement that there was no funding for this research would qualify as appropriate funding statements. Next, please. We are, because of some feedback we got after this discussion document was published, considering the following amendment. And just a little bit of background. I know that Rosia is going to get into some of this. There is metadata that is involved and required for to accompany publications, and we are considering adding this statement that while it is not a required element, that COPE is recommending that publishers include the information about funding in the metadata for all funded research. That amendment is pending processes at COPE to see that happens. I believe that's the last of my slides. Yep. So thank you very much, and I'll look at the questions that have come up and try to answer any specific to COPE if I can during Rosia's presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nancy, for that overview. Now, from Crossref perspective, I would like to introduce kind of how we see funding transparency and funding acknowledgement from the metadata kind of perspective. But first, just a few words about Crossref. You might be familiar with Crossref and what we do, but as a summary, we are a not-for-profit membership organization that exists to make scholarly communications better. Together with our members who maintain Crossref DOI records, we drive metadata exchange and support nearly 2 billion monthly API queries. So Crossref makes research objects easy to find, cite, link, access, and reuse. Research objects such as articles, preprints, books, grants, standards, datasets, and more. And we do this because we envision a rich and reusable open network of relationships connecting research organizations, people, things, and actions that forms a scholarly record that the global community can build on forever for the benefit of society. But we obviously don't do this alone. We work with our 24,000 organizational members from 166 countries. 50% of our members are based in Asia, and 40% of our members are universities or scholarly-led organizations. We work with 130 sponsors organizations, which are organizations that help us work with our communities in different regions, as well as a group of 50 amazing ambassadors that help us engage with our community locally. As of today, Crossref is host of 180 million open metadata records with associated DOIs that are resolved 1.9 billion times per month, which accounts to 92% of all DOI use on the web. As I said, we support 2 billion calls to our API every month by thousands of systems ingesting and reusing this open metadata. The vision that I just mentioned is what we call the research nexus, which is our version of a rich and reusable open network of relationships that connect research organizations and outputs, people, things, and actions. The foundation of that network of the research nexus is metadata. The richer and more comprehensive the metadata in Crossref records is, the more value there is for our members and for others, including for future generations. So rich metadata records allow the research community to bring together scattered pieces of the scholarly record and sheds light into the relationships within objects beyond just PIDs. So the metadata that our members create and maintain is openly available, and both human and machine interfaces facilitate access to it. And a network of services across the research ecosystem makes use of that open metadata. If the metadata records are incomplete and important information about an object, such as funding information, doesn't make its way to the metadata, that critical aspect of the research endeavor, essential for the transparency and accountability of the ecosystem, won't be visible to the community and the numerous tools and infrastructure that feed off Crossref metadata downstream. So when we talk about Crossref metadata, we are talking about data about data. So it's the description of research content, articles, preprints, grants, data sets, peer review. It is a structure and follows a set of standards and rules, and is always open. This open metadata enables higher discoverability, reproducibility, research integrity, reporting and assessment of research and researchers, traceability, funding transparency, and also it's the basis of links between objects and other type of content. So this is why we strongly encourage our members to register rich metadata of the research objects. So the more data points there are to describe a single research object, the more context the community has to place that object within the research ecosystem. This here is an example of a research output, in this case from eLife, with rich metadata. In this record, we can see metadata that describes contributors' relationship between research objects, licenses, references, cross-mark metadata to include post-publication modifications, affiliations, and also funding metadata. All of those metadata fields allow for a complete and rich contextualization of the object that they relate to, adding to the trustworthiness of the research output and providing the research community with powerful data about it. So if we go into funding metadata more specifically, we can differentiate information about the funder, information about the award, and information about the relationship between the funding and any related outputs. Funding metadata is encouraged but optional in the schema, in Crossref schema. So it's optional because not all outputs have related funding, or the field might not be relevant to all types of content, but that doesn't mean it's not an important field to help understand the research output and where it sits. So we strongly encourage you to make sure that when possible, funding information is added to your metadata records. And now I'd like to explore a little bit what it looks like and how you can do it. So if we start with funder information, which is information about the funding agency that provided the support for that particular research output, funders can be represented in Crossref metadata in three different ways. The first one is using a ROR ID, using a funder name and a funder identifier, such as the Crossref Open Funder Registry or funder ID, or just the funder name. If a funder name is supplied without an identifier, we will try to match the name to an existing identifier. But because names alone are very ambiguous, if a match is not found, that portion of the funding information will not be considered valid until the member updates the record with an identifier, meaning that the funder name will be passed through to our XML and JSON outputs, but it will not be found using the filters on funding information that we support via our REST API, for example. Last year, we started supporting ROR for funders, and we strongly encourage you to start using ROR to identify funders within your metadata records. As you know, ROR is an open organization identifier that allows for an ambiguous assertion of funders, and it can be retrieved via our API. Funder IDs remain available for you to use if you wish, but this change allows publishers, service providers, and funders to streamline workflows and introduce efficiencies by using a single open identifier for both research affiliation and funding organizations. If there is a DOI link there if you want to learn more. Once the funder is properly identified, you can make sure that the correct award information is included as part of the funding metadata. And again, there are a couple of ways you can do this. This can be done with an award number, which is the identifier used by the funder, provided by the funder to use either internally or externally, but it was provided by the funder, or with a grant DOI. When available, the grant DOI is the preferred option as it is a persistent identifier, which means it's unique to the award, is resolvable to a grant landing page, and it comes with a rich metadata record provided by the funder, which only adds to the transparency of the information. By supplying Crossref grant DOIs in the funding metadata, the content will be automatically connected with Crossref grant linking system through the metadata, adding to the research nexus and making the connections between funding and outputs seamless. This helps the research community, funders, and society as a whole understand the funding context in which our research output was generated, and also see the impact that the funding has. So it goes both ways. So before very recently, if you wanted to include a grant DOI in your metadata, in your funding metadata, to identify an award, you had to use the award number field, but following kind of community consultation and request, we recently introduced a new metadata field in our schema to make the grant DOI field unique in that sense. So this new field has been requested by the community, as I said, to make the connections easy to assert and analyze. And we're very happy to be able to support it, and we hope that the community can start kind of using it for all content types. Grant DOIs can be used as a standalone way to identify funding, so you don't need any other identifier, but you can also, of course, use it in combination with an award number, as long as the award number is nested within the grant DOI assertion. Otherwise, they will be indexed as two separate awards. We don't want that to happen. I said before that what makes the research nexus a network are the relationships between objects. and those relationships can be found in the metadata. So when you include a grant DOI in funding data with a grant DOI attribute, a relationship is financed by is automatically inserted into your metadata record. If the grant DOI is registered with Crossref, the relationship will be inserted into the grant record metadata as well. So making that relationship bi-directional. And this is what it looks like in the metadata. Here we can see on the left-hand side on the screen, the metadata record of an output, where a set of relationships between the output and other different objects are clearly stated through relationship metadata. One of those relationships is financed by, and we can see how a grant DOI has been included here by the member. The fact that this grant DOI is in the metadata record links that output directly to our Crossref grant linking system. And on the right-hand side, we can see how the same Crossref grant metadata record, we can clearly see the relationship also stated. So on the left, we see that the output was funded by that grant. And on the right-hand side, we can see how that grant supported the production of that research output. And this is what we mean by metadata relationship and making the connections that make the research nexus a reality. I wanted to also show you this very promising table where we can see the uptake of different metadata fields used by Crossref members to describe funding in their metadata records. We can see how over the years the numbers are increasing from the number of grants being registered with Crossref. Very happy to say that that number is a lot closer to 200,000 grants registered with Crossref at the moment, to records using either funder IDs or role IDs to identify funders unequivocally. So if you're ready to start including funding information in your metadata records, you have options. So you can add funding metadata when you first register your records. So next time that you're going to be registering your record, just make sure that you include funding metadata there. Or you can always update and add to already existing records to include funding metadata. Just as a reminder, you can update your records at any time, and it doesn't have any cost attached to it. So updating metadata records is always free. So we really encourage you to make use of that and maintain your records. If you want to update your records, again, you have different options, and it depends on how that record was initially registered with us. You can update your records to add funding information by uploading a CSV file through our web deposit form using the supplemental metadata upload. And I just put there as a screenshot of what the CSV file should look like. This option is best for bulk edits without having to use XML. You can also edit single records using Metadata Manager as long as the record was registered using this tool, the web deposit form, or the deprecated legacy Metadata Manager. This option is best for editing single records. So if you just want to edit one record, Metadata Manager might be the best option for you. And you can always make changes to your XML file and resubmit to Crossref. This option is best for high volume automated workflows for members with XML pipelines. And the last option is a resource-only deposit. So if you're on the only changes that you're doing is for metadata, funding metadata, a resource-only deposit is also an option for you. This slide is a quick overview and summary of what we've been kind of discussing, and a set of guidelines as well that we give our members in terms of how to approach funding metadata for the records. And we recommend that you review the funding data markup guide. If you are if you're submitting funding data via XML, that's a really important thing to do. But even if you are using one of our helper tools, that you don't have to mess around with XML, I think it's still a good idea to maybe have a sense of how the data is structured and how it's ingested. In terms of how to engage with your community and with your authors, you can ask authors to submit the names of their funders and grant numbers when they submit the manuscript, or you can extract funding information from the text or accepted manuscript, as Nancy was explaining a second ago. We recommend that you use ROR IDs as funder identifiers, or that you match funder names to the corresponding funder IDs. If a grant DOI is not available, you can include the funder supplied award or grant number. We just went through some of the options you have to update metadata and to include rich funding metadata for your records. And if you want to do that and you don't really know how many of your records don't have funding metadata, or what funding metadata is missing and what you could be kind of adding to your records, there are a couple of options for you to self-assess the way, what's the best way forward. So you can make use of our metadata retrieval tools to check the metadata we hold for your content. And this way you can see what metadata you submitted to Crossref and what's missing. Or you can check your progress using participation reports to see the percentage of your deposit that have funding metadata registered. And very quickly, I wanted to show you what participation reports looks like and how you can leverage the tool to increase the completeness of your records. So if you go to participation reports, which I think that Cora will be sharing a link in the chat. So if you go to participation reports and look for your organization, you will see a window like this, where your organization's kind of record will show the percentage of the records that have metadata for each category. So if you want to see what's missing from your records, you can click here in Download Gap Report, and a window like this will open, where you can select to see which records are missing funding information. So if you click funding award numbers and funder registry IDs, and you can select as well the type of record that you want to analyze, and the time frame as well. You can select all time or current year content, and you click download. It will take some time depending on how many records you have, but give the tool a minute or two, and then you will get a CSV file like this, where you'll get DOIs of your records that are missing that metadata field. So this way, if you want to see how complete your records are in terms of funding metadata, you can identify which records are missing that metadata, and update the records if you wish. And with that, that's all I wanted to cover. Thank you very much for your attention. Please keep in touch. We are always happy to answer any question. Just send us an email to support@crossref.org, and we'll be happy to help. And as well, please join us in the community forum, where both the Crossref team, but also members of the community can help answering questions and discussing ideas. With that, thank you very much, and I will stop maybe sharing, and maybe we can answer some questions.
Yes, thank you very much for everyone who has submitted questions in the Q&A. I also spotted some in the chat, but we'll give the priority to the Q&A box, and then once we run out of these, we might go back to the chat if there's time. There were some questions about the COPE's application process at the moment, and I spotted, Nancy, that you have already been answering these. It's a bit outside of the topic of the session, but I think since Nancy is willing, I would invite you to respond to that.
Yep, thank you. It is an important question. We are currently redoing our membership process to try to streamline it for applicants. It has, over time, gotten to be a little bit of Frankenstein in its characteristics, and so we are trying to make it much more streamlined for applicants. We're hoping this is going to be done in the near term. I've posted in the, I think in the chat, but it may have been in the Q&A, the links to the COPE membership website and specific link to something called the COPE Journal Audit, which is going to be required of applicants going forward in the future. And until we open the application process again, interested journals could go ahead and complete that audit, which will only serve to strengthen their application when it does open.
Thank you, Nancy. That's lovely. I hope this has made that important point clearer. So following on through some of the other questions, Rafael Diaz Campo has been asking about vocabulary for grants as it is for credit authors. So I see that Rocio has already typed in an answer, but let's also respond live.
Yeah, so yeah, I just answered to that saying that Crossref grant linking system supports funders in registering different types of award. At the moment, we have up to 18 different types of awards and support for research. It doesn't have to be monetarily necessarily. And we even have an other category if one of the 18th currently available doesn't really help in describing the award. That to say, it's not a standard or anything like that. It's part of our schema that we have developed with the funder community, and it's evolving. It's a living thing, like all the other schemas in Crossref. So we are always in conversation with funders and the community to see if it's working, if more types of funding are needed, or like vocabulary needs to change. So it's not set in stone. That's what I wanted to highlight. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rocio. And we also have a question here from someone. Is there any guidance on how to acknowledge funding when article processing charge is supported by university library?
Yep. So that is not considered external funding that needs to be declared in a funding statement, because those libraries cover all of the employees of that university who might be funding. So it's not direct support for an individual piece of research. In that case, one might disclose that in an acknowledgement section, for instance, if that's the case. If you ever have a question about whether something should be disclosed, I encourage you to include that in your cover letters to journals to say, this is my situation, where should this be disclosed? But in general, those sorts of that sort of support, which is very important, and there's another question about this as well, should not be in a funding statement.
If I can add to that, APCs is actually one of the 18th type of awards that we support. So if a library wanted to make sure that that APC was properly acknowledged through kind of Crossref grant linking system is something that we could definitely support.
Cora, can I interrupt for a second? The person
Yeah, sure.
who requested information about membership is asking me to repost the links. They could scroll back through the chat and find them there.
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much. Okay, so thank you. Also, thank you both of you for giving some light on the APC. So this is not required if it was funded by the library. However, there are ways of potentially acknowledging it, and any acknowledgement is usually encouraged. More transparency is better. All right, so the next question we've got here is from Lucia Cespedes. I do apologize for anybody whose name I completely mispronounce. My own background, my first language is Polish, so I tend to read things as I see them. So apologies. And so many journals published by low resourced institutions, for example, a scholar-led journal based in a global South university already struggle to pay for DOIs for their articles. Isn't there a risk that grant DOIs will become a visibility barrier for funding agency who can't afford them? So I think this is a very interesting and quite complex question because there is a few different things to point to, and if there's no objection, I will take it first, and if anybody wants to shed some more light on it, I'm happy to have further input. So first of all, in terms of affordability of DOIs for any member of Crossref, we are very much concerned about being accessible to the community. We're in the process of reviewing our fees. Just in this January, we've launched a new fee tier that is lower to what it was before in terms of our membership fees. The transaction fees remain the same, except that we've also launched a pilot to specifically increase affordability of DOIs for grants for funders with the a 2-year fee waiver on the back on the kind of on older grants for funders who have a big backlog of grants that they would need to register with us to kind of benefit from those links of things that have already been published in the past. So that's one thing. The other thing is about institutions. Should they be both registering grants and DOIs for outputs? Say a university, for example, has a publishing arm, but also issues grants. That institution would only need to become Crossref member once. So there isn't a separate membership fee. Once you're a Crossref member, you're a Crossref member, and it's kind of a decision. What is your primary primary form of participating in Crossref? However, the one does not preclude the other. So if you're registering grants with us, you can still register content and vice versa. So as I said, we are reviewing our fees to make sure that they are affordable. We have expanded our global equitable membership program, which now includes many more countries across Global South as well. And that applies to all types of members. Again, whether they are publishing members or funder members, they can all benefit from no membership fees and no content registration fees as well. So we are aware that this could be a barrier to participation. Whether it is a barrier to visibility of funders is a separate story, I think, because So far, the main motivation for funders to being part of Crossref is not so much visibility as much as being able to track the outputs that they are funding. And this traceability or transparency of funding is what they are interested in, both for simply being able to verify the grantees' progress, but also to be able to help evaluate their entire programs of funding that they are issuing. So in that sense, it's part of, whilst this obviously requires a level of expenditure, it is also feeding back to some of the processes that otherwise the funder needs to do potentially manually or has very limited ability to deliver. So as always, we are trying to be affordable, but in the same time, we're mindful of being persistent as well for the identifiers. So yes, we will always be looking into making sure that we don't generate barriers to any type of organization to participate with Crossref. All right, and we have the next question from Ian Caswell. If a journal is funded by an agency to enable it to publish all articles open access in the journal, regardless whether the work being published has or hasn't been funded, to be transparent about this, would the journal funding need to be declared in every article published, or would a blanket statement added to information about the journal be sufficient?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Let me.
Okay. I understand the question, but it's an interesting case. In this case, the funder does not funds the journal to disseminate, I suppose, relevant science, regardless of how the output themselves were funded. Uh, I
No, I
don't
mean,
believe we had the
I don't
case of
know.
that.
Yeah, like, let me just clarify. Let's say it's a society-owned journal. And uh, it's clear that it's a society-owned journal, like the American College of OBGYN owned the journal that I edited some time ago. It is not necessary to say in your funding statement or for the journals to state on every article that the agency owned that journal and paid for that journal. They can just say it on their masthead or in their journal information. If that doesn't answer the question, if they could clarify their question better for me, that would be great.
All right, so I suppose we'll wait for Ian to let us know whether this has been whether this has covered his question. Excuse me. And now we have a question from Biljana Kosanovic, who provides and deposits basic metadata project information when a project receives its DOI. We use DOIs for funding in the metadata on our articles, but for many projects we don't find DOIs, and sometimes not even funders. Rocio, would you like to take that one? I could see that you
Yes.
were
So
typing already.
I just sent that response. And in the case of award or grants DOIs, um, that will be the funder. So the funder, the research funder or the agency provides the funding metadata to Crossref when registering that award with us. Um, so that's the provenance of that metadata. In the case of funder IDs, which are also DOIs, that comes from the funder registry, which is maintained by Crossref and Elsevier. And so if you cannot find a funder and you will need a funder added, you can contact us. I just send that link for you to have a look. But remember that you can always use ROR IDs. If you cannot find a funder in the funder registry, you can use ROR IDs instead. So I don't know if that answered the questions. If not, please just ask another one.
Yeah, some clarification. All right. I also noticed that Nancy has already provided a response to this, but there was another question from Tejinder Singh Chachi. From COPE point of view, failing to disclose private industrial funding for a study falls under ethical issue. Industrial funding for studies of related product or discoveries would be a conflict of interest. I am curious, do publishers actively look into this issue, and are there COPE guidelines to flag such issues?
Yep, it's a great question. Failure to disclose a significant conflict of interest or competing interest is an ethical problem. Having a conflict of interest does not invalidate the work. It just makes it clear for the reader that this person had this in their background. It might be financial, it might be personal, it might be all sorts of things. Certainly, if it comes to the attention of the editor that there is an undisclosed conflict of interest, the editor needs to investigate that as a potential ethical breach. Hopefully, during the peer review process, someone who's reviewing the paper would identify or have some knowledge of of an author's potential conflicts, but that's increasingly less likely. And but it's not something necessarily that for every paper, anybody at an editorial office is going to go looking for undisclosed conflicts of interest for the many, many authors that submit papers. I do suggest, and this is not COPE guidance, but this is my personal opinion, so take it for what it's worth, that each author should complete their own conflicts of interest statement. I certainly would have been totally unaware of financial or personal conflicts of interest with my co-authors as I was publishing, and if that was left to me as a corresponding author, I would have been incomplete. And so in order to protect the authors themselves from an undisclosed COI, that each author should do that themselves. But again, that is my personal opinion. Did I answer the question?
We shall soon find out. We were having some positive responses
Please
before
do
in the
ask
chat.
for, yeah, please
I
ask
just
for
wanted to
further.
follow up with another question about conflict of interest that has appeared in the chat early in the session. Hejia Wei was asking how to differentiate the conflict of interest and funding. I think that is quite an important question, I think, for COPE too.
It is a very important question. So, and I will tell you that we are in the process of completing work on a conflicts of interest guidance document that I suspect will be out in the summertime. And that may help some of these. But funding is a specific kind of a potential conflict of interest. But it is so unique in some of the ways I think we've tried to describe during this discussion and also in the COPE discussion document that it needs to be pulled out separately. It is related to direct funding. So this is why things like APC payments, they're not a direct source of funding for a research project. And they therefore should not be included in a funding statement unless somebody paid the APC under a grant that they received but not from an institutional source, like a publication agreement with libraries and such. So if there's direct funding, and there are examples in the COPE document, if there is, that needs to be pulled out completely, but it's direct funding. Another question that came up in the chat, I think, was about salaries. And certainly much research is done by people who do not have direct funding other than for their research and do it as part of their job. So it would be paid for by their salary. That is not included in a funding statement, but would be included in their affiliations. So, if as a member of the Department of X, Y, and Z, I get a salary by stating I'm a member of X, Y, and Z, that relationship is disclosed.
All right, thank you so much. Well, we're on time. It's 4 o'clock where I sit, but it's different times from everybody else's perspectives. So we ran out of time. There was a few more questions, so we'll see. We'll try to circle back by email to anyone who didn't get the response. We have the record of them in the Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone. I suppose, Rocio, do you want to close?
Just to close, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for your questions. And as Cora said, we will be sharing the Q&A and the recordings in due course. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you know where to find us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.